Welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, August 31st, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the state of Missouri, as the Republican governor is yet next to answer the call from Donald Trump and the Republican White House to redraw their maps ahead of the 2026 midterm elections. A lot of people have been speculating across the country what is the next Republican state to follow suit now that Texas and California are likely set to redraw their congressional maps ahead of the 2026 midterm elections, and Missouri seems to be the first state moving in to respond to Donald Trump's question to many Republicans across this country: are you going to redraw your maps? Now, this move comes at a time that seems to show that the Missouri Republican Party is quite worried about the 2026 midterm elections and what it might mean for their state. For a bit of context, Missouri Republicans already drew a pretty expansive gerrymander in the 2022 midterm cycle. Right before the elections had been held, the Missouri GOP passed a congressional map removing a competitive seat from the state's entire delegation, giving the Republicans an upper hand advantage in almost every single seat. But they left two seats for Democrats, one on the more competitive edge and one as a safe Democratic vote sink out of the city of St. Louis, Missouri, to which it found that Democrats routinely were only going to be able to capture about 2 seats out of the state's total 8 seats in its congressional delegation. Prior to the 2022 midterms, Democrats had been making major inroads. Republicans had gerrymandered the map before after the 2010 midterm elections, but that map still lent itself to having a Democratic representative in a competitive district here on the outskirts of St. Louis, to which Republicans shored up to being a more conservative district, but still, the Missouri GOP is fearful. And it isn't just the Missouri Republicans who are worried about the midterms. Donald Trump, for a long time, has been obsessed with the 2026 midterms and has been asking Republicans across this country, please redraw your maps, because they know they are going to lose the election in the 2026 year. And because the Missouri Republicans are deciding to move forward with a redraw here, the question really is, what exactly does a redraw look like? Now, a lot of speculation to actually crack Kansas City, Missouri, which is another major population hub across the state that many people, in Missouri expect Republicans to draw out into pretty conservative and solid districts here. The point is that Missouri Republicans do, in fact, have the means to crack these cities in a variety of different ways to only give Democrats one singular seat out of the state of Missouri, to which we are now seeing states like Maryland, where Democrats could, in theory, draw out another Republican seat to go tit for tat with the GOP, from Missouri to Maryland to overall, net equalize across the board here. But the point is that in the state of Missouri, Republicans do have the means of drawing out a congressional seat here. But it isn't just one seat that they're targeting. As I mentioned, after the 2020 census, Republicans drew out a congressional district that they thought would be previously more conservative and more competitive, rather. We saw Ann Wagner here in Missouri's 2nd district had been winning in her congressional district in the 2020 election by 6.4%. In the 2018 midterms, Democrats came within 4 points of winning this district, despite it being a solid red district in 2016. It was Donald Trump and the GOP that made this district go from being Republican plus 21 to Republican plus 4, that in 2022, they knew they needed to shore up. But rather than it becoming this safe Republican vote sink like they had intended it to be, the Democrats were still making gains in the suburban areas across the state that did make inroads into Missouri's 2nd district. That by the time you reached the 2024 cycle, Missouri's 2nd district, again, drawn to be a Republican gerrymandered district, was voting to the left of the rest of the state, which meant that in theory, in the next cycle, this state could in fact see 3 Democrats from its congressional delegation. And that's because Democrats have a vote sink in Missouri's 1st. They have another one in Missouri's 5th. These are 2 districts that Republicans knew previously they were never going to have a chance at actually winning. But because Donald Trump is making these moves and saying that you need to redraw their maps, the Missouri governor and the Republicans across the state are now considering axing the 5th district entirely and taking this 2nd district and making it even more conservative, because they didn't actually expect the 2nd district to be this competitive in 2022, and certainly not in 2024. But the fact remains that if the swing had been identical to that of the 2016 election to the 2018 election, this district in particular, with Ann Wagner, who's been representing this district for a long time, it was a 16-point swing between 2016 and 2018. That would be enough for Missouri's 2nd district to be competitive and actually go to the Democratic Party by about 6 points. That 16-point swing mapped across the state as well would reveal another competitive districts, again, on the outskirts, with suburban regions that cover the outskirts of St. Louis, Missouri, that would in fact make Missouri Republicans more on the oppositional end than they would have liked. And so out of this fear of what Democrats might be able to do in the 2026, not 2016, God forbid, 2026 midterm cycle, they are redrawing another state across this country in an effort to give Donald Trump an upper hand in many of these congressional elections that Republicans just simply would not have had elsewhere. Texas already is set to have Republicans gaining 4 to 5 seats in this Texas delegation. That's going to bring Democrats down from 13 to just 8 and bring Republicans up from 25 to 30. And across the country, that actually makes a pretty big deal. Republicans go up to 225, Democrats go down to 210. The California map is a bit shaky. Democrats might gain 3 or 4 seats rather than the expected 5, but the map is still up in the air as to how exactly it's going to be drawn. So maybe we'll see that some of these districts end up being more Democratic. The point is, the Democrats will be counteracting some of the gains Republicans have made in Texas, but Missouri adding into the bunch, and potentially Indiana and Florida and Ohio, the Republicans are set to overall have a net gain. After these redistricting wars, the Republicans were going to go forward regardless if Democrats decided to counteract. And that's, again, because Donald Trump has been so fearful about what these midterm elections might actually bring. It's one question to look at these races and say, well, we need to invest the RNC tens of millions of dollars in some of these districts that maybe we thought and took for granted in the 2024 cycle. And that could be a very compelling case. Typically speaking, the presidential powers in a midterm cycle are often, if the president is popular, they will go do stump speeches for them in a bunch of different battleground states for their political party. When Obama, was coming into this, Democrats were hopeful that if he had maintained, because he did not through 2010 and 2014, but if he had maintained a high level of popularity, that could help usher in some Democratic victories in some states that the president had won in the previous election cycle. But rather than go about this the traditional way, Donald Trump is looking at a way of really just redrawing the maps, taking states that already gerrymander. I mean, Missouri at baseline is a state that gives Kamala Harris and gives Democrats routinely 40 to 45% of the vote, depending on the election. Kamala Harris getting 2 out of 5 voters in the state, and yet Democrats after this cycle might have just 1 Democratic representative from the state of Missouri, and potentially 0. So now you're seeing states like Maryland taking a district like the 1st and saying, we want to redraw the maps and pass it in a way that makes it so Democrats have a gerrymandered 8-0 majority in Maryland to counteract states like Missouri, whereas states like Texas and California are meant to balance each other out. The point is that across a number of these different states and across a number of different congressional boundaries, the Republicans are showing their hand. It is not Democrats who are scrambling to redraw their maps because they're fearful of what the 2026 midterms might bring. They know the 2026 midterms are going to be more positive for Democrats than they will be negative. And Republicans know it too. And the Oval Office knows it too. And so they have to do anything they can to really mitigate their losses. And chances are, they know too, the Democrats are prepping for not only in 2026, but Democrats have already opened up the idea that in a year like 2028, where they'll have more lead time to get through a congressional session or actually campaign on this for voters across their state. But in states like Virginia, which have a 6-5 split delegation, if Democrats win a supermajority in the Virginia House of Delegates, or even have a substantive enough majority to pass through, repealing the independent commission at place in the state of Virginia, this map could be redrawn in a way that gives Democrats 7, 8, maybe 9 seats across the state. In a state like New York, which does not have the constitutional ability to redraw their congressional boundaries ahead of the 2026 midterms, but very well could do it ahead of the 2028 midterms, where maybe Democrats could gain 1, 2, 3 more seats across this state. By the time we reach 2028, there's a strong possibility that if Democrats win the courts in Wisconsin even more than they have right now, they have a 4-3 advantage if it becomes 5-2 or even 6-1, which is a non-zero chance that happens ahead of the 2028 election, that Supreme Court orders a redraw in the state of Wisconsin, netting Democrats potentially 1 to 2 seats. You can find that maybe not in 2026, Democrats may not come out with the upper hand. But depending on who's elected governor in Colorado, that could happen. A 4-4 delegation in a state that hasn't voted for Republicans on the presidential level since 2004 probably should not have a 4-4 split delegation. And chances are that in 2026, Democrats will probably gain the 8th district. They'll probably gain the 3rd district and the non-zero chance that they kick out Lauren Boebert in the House delegation there. But it's all about shoring up these districts and making them in a way that makes it beneficial for the Democratic Party. And that's what they're going to see. Because as Republicans continue to go down this pathway, it only enrages Democrats too. And although Republicans do have this upper hand, there was no doubt in my mind that from the very beginning, Republicans were always going to do this. If Donald Trump himself, who, to many of these Republicans is seen as Lord and Savior, if he's calling up the Republican delegation and saying, we want a redraw of the map. We want this state to look dramatically different, and we want a map like this rather than the one that is in place. They are going to bend the knee because that is the leader of their party. And Democrats, quite frankly, don't have that because they don't have the Oval Office. And it's not as if, Democrats were looking after the 2020 election and Joe Biden was calling up these Democrats and saying, draw an egregious gerrymander in your state. By no means was he saying that. Sure, some Democratic delegations did that, with their own will, of their own liberty. In 2022, we saw that Illinois delegation go pretty overwhelmingly in favor of the Democratic Party. But this, by every metric, is overreach. And this, by every metric, is Donald Trump exerting the bully pulpit, the powers of the presidency in a way that is traditionally unconventional. And taking a look at what we've seen now in Missouri, it is showing that the Republican Party is fearful, that Missouri's 2nd district might go to the Democratic Party, and that everything might hinge on just a few districts across the country, that if Republicans can just help Republicans get this much closer to being at the majority, it'll all be worth it. Even though there's a lot of public pushback, a lot of voters are angry with this decision, and Democrats still are sitting on some states that, again, might not redraw ahead of 2026. But considering the damage that might be done to both parties by the end of this cycle, Democrats have the ability to really hammer it in the 2028 year. And this sets a terribly bad precedent for Republicans and Democrats across this country, and more so for Republicans who have been the main ones trying to push forth this redraw. At the end of the day, it is the Republican Party who initiated this redistricting war. It is Texas and Greg Abbott and Donald Trump who are solely responsible for this redistricting battle. And they know it. Donald Trump gladly will take credit because he will tell the press, I'm the one who made the call. I'm the reason Texas has 5 more Republicans. Fox News and the GOP love to build out this talking point. It is Democrats who started this, but absolutely not. And anybody with sense knows that. And that is the problem here, I think, for the GOP trying to walk away with this, is that at its core, no matter where you stand on the partisan edge from far right to far left, what you know is sequence and order of events. One of the most simplest things in American politics. An action and an equal and opposite reaction. In Texas, when they made the announcement they were redrawing their maps, California said, we will too. And now, Missouri looks like it wants to listen to Donald Trump, and we will see the next Democratic state, if there is one, that genuinely follows through and says, we want to redraw our maps as well. But Donald Trump will tell you adamantly that he is the reason Republicans might gain seats in a number of these states, because he is as brazen as ever, because he doesn't have a reelect to worry about. He doesn't have a reputation that he cares about tarnishing, because at the end of the day, if Republicans who know they're probably going to win the Senate can maintain control of the House, it greenlights another 2 years of complete and total Republican dominance in Washington, D.C. and across this country. And Donald Trump is willing to do anything necessary to ensure that happens, and that includes breaking precedent, congressional and constitutional precedent in these states, and asking and requiring Republican state legislatures to redraw their congressional boundaries ahead of an upcoming midterm cycle. And we will see. Is it effective? Do Missouri Republicans draw out the Democrats that they say they're going to draw? My bet is yes. I do think Missouri is next in line to draw in a brand new congressional map. But on the margins, while it may narrow down an eventual Democratic majority, it does not prevent it. And Democrats right now still stand to be the favorites in the 2026 House elections, despite the Republicans pulling every single trick in the playbook to try to mitigate that from happening. Because they are scared. And they know the Democrats are on track for victory, and Donald Trump knows it too. No other reason you would push for these redraws if your policies were as popular as Caroline Leavitt says they are. But they aren't. And voters don't like it. And rather than respond to the will of the voters and adapt to an American electorate that does swing back and forth between Trump and Biden and Trump and potentially a Democrat in 28, they are now building out their own electorates by redrawing states like Texas, redrawing states like Missouri and Indiana and Ohio and Florida, because that is the only way the Oval Office sees a pathway to a majority. It's not through the traditional means. It's not through winning over swing voters. It is by forcing their hand in congressional districts that ultimately right now already favored the GOP and will only continue to favor them after these redraws, showing their hand and showing how fearful they are about the upcoming midterm cycle. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.